New at 9, sudden infant death syndrome. SIDS is one of the key issues in a case involving a Broken Arrow couple who said they were not allowed to grieve in peace the death of their grandbaby. Instead, as we first reported last year, the Wagner County Sheriff's Office accused Bill and Lisa Woolley in connection with alleged sexual abuse and murder of 14-month-old Elijah. According to a transcript from the preliminary hearing, the lead detective on that case, Danny Elliott, did not believe SIDS was real. Well, today in Wagner County, judge actually considered a defense motion which cited a lack of evidence and called for the charges to be dismissed. The judge concluded, though, he'll let a jury make that decision. Trial has yet to be scheduled. As for sudden infant death syndrome, leading health experts, including the Mayo Clinic, say SIDS is real. It takes about the lives of about 2,500 infants, in fact, a year in our country. It is a major cause of death in children younger than a year old. Now, in the Broken Arrow case, Elijah was 14 months old, but because he was born to a mother who used meth, he was developmentally closer to a 10-month-old. Mayo Clinic says a baby has a greater risk of SIDS if the mother smokes cigarettes, uses drugs or alcohol, or has inadequate prenatal care. In Elijah's case, he had all of that going against him. There are other major questions surrounding this case, from the initial investigation to the medical examiner's findings. I've been looking into this now for months and will continue to as this case moves toward trial.
Big developments in a Fox 23 exclusive story Clay Loney has been following for years. Clay.
All right, Shay, this is a huge development. It is vindication for this local couple, Lisa Woolley on this side, her husband Bill on my right. Now, for more than 2 years, they've insisted they were wrongfully charged in Wagner County following the death of their 14-month-old grandson. For the past year, I have been digging into this case surrounding the couple from Broken Arrow. This goes back to March 30th, 2018, when little Elijah died overnight in his playpen where he would sleep in his grandparents' home. Now, they called 911, Sheriff's Office responded, and the couple was eventually charged with first-degree murder and child sexual abuse. From the beginning, the Woolleys said this was an unexplained but innocent death akin to sudden infant death syndrome. They accused the Wagner County Sheriff's Office of refusing to consider evidence they say proved the child was not harmed in any way.
Things that were never taken that could have settled this thing in the beginning, or things that were never looked into or never investigated. There's so many things that could have put this thing to rest in the very beginning. It's incredible to me.
So the lead investigator told me he followed CDC guidelines for investigating child deaths. But that led to the Woolleys being presented to the public as child killers. So it's very important tonight to make abundantly clear the state has now dropped those charges against the Woolleys. No murder charge, no charge of child sexual abuse. The only charges the Woolleys still face at this point are child neglect and enabling child neglect. And I have learned those charges are based on statements that have since been recanted. There is a lot to this story. How it got this far, how much it's cost the couple to prove their innocence, the months they were held in the Wagner County Jail. There's a long line of people, including the governor's father, who say the Woolleys suffered a massive travesty of justice.
Oh, I'm Lisa. This is my husband, Bill Woolley. We live in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, in Wagner County. Half of Broken Arrow is in Tulsa County, and the other half of Broken Arrow is in Wagner County. I want to share our story. We've been kind of shut down for the last 3 years. Not really been able to ever put it out there and tell people what really happened in our situation. So
absolutely, it's a chance for us to tell this, our side of the story, that we've been accused of, our family has been accused of up to 16 felonies, and we've never had an opportunity to share our voice in 3 years, and so we're gonna been given this opportunity.
I also think this is an opportunity to, I think that the body of Christ needs to see what things can degenerate into when we negate our responsibility to be salt and light in the earth and be the ones, the influencers, in different positions in education, in legal thing, in media. Because when we vacate our responsibilities to come in and be, represent the Lord, we open up a big gap where other people can come in and, put people in who don't have God's heart, who aren't looking for truth, who maybe are selfishly ambitious, or and that just opens up the door for every kind of bad thing to come in, like it says in James, wherever there's selfish ambition, there's every evil thing. so, we have 3 children, my oldest daughter, and then a son, and then my youngest daughter. And our oldest daughter struggled with addiction to drugs. When she was about 15, she was horsing around with some friends, and she broke a tooth down to the nerve. And the doctor ended up putting her on opioids, and that started the whole slippery slope into the whole drug culture. And she just started changing right before our eyes. And it was, many times trying to get her help, trying to figure out how to maneuver this, how to help her not go over the edge. It's been a journey. Anyway, so when she was 18, she got pregnant with someone that she dated on and off for 6 years, and gave birth to our grandson in July of 2012. And then 4 or 5 years later, meanwhile, she had gone into a program, and she did well for a while, but then she still struggled when she came out. And she was further ahead, like she had gained some wisdom, but still needed more help. So anyway, then she got pregnant a second time, with a different man, and had Elijah. And we ended up taking custody of him when he was 4 or 5 weeks old, because we could see she was still struggling and it would be dangerous, and she was in an abusive relationship. And we had taken custody of our other grandson when he was about 4 months old, even though we mostly took care of him anyway before that, because she was still struggling, and we were very concerned about that they wouldn't have a chance if we didn't intervene. And we just couldn't let that happen, let them be destroyed. So she was angry at us, initially, because she didn't understand why. She does now. I mean, when she's clear-minded, she totally gets it, and is glad that we did. So anyway, we had the 2 boys, and we lived in Tulsa County in Broken Arrow when Elijah was born. But then about halfway through his life, we ended up moving over here to the other side of Broken Arrow, to Wagner County. And when they struggled, with health issues and some setbacks, but our older grandson had a lot of the same issues that Elijah had, but he just got better and better as we worked with him over the years, and so he came a long way. We were confident that Elijah would do the same, if we just kept pouring into him and working with him and help giving them that security and that nutrition and all that. So, but when Elijah was 14 months old, he was developmentally probably closer to a 10 or 11 month old, but one morning I prepared his bottle. He struggled with constipation his whole life, allergies, but from the time he was born, he had stuff put into his bottle to help, like a prune juice or some other laxative. We were using Smooth Move tea in every bottle just to keep him moving, because he'd get really constipated, these golf ball size hard dry stools that he'd be trying to pass. So we worked with him and took him to he probably went to the doctor 5 or 6 times throughout his life, and none of them ever expressed any concern that he had any special needs or that he needed any special care, and just encouraged us that he would catch up, if we just kept working with him, just like our other grandson had. But anyway, when I fixed that bottle for him that morning, he hadn't been feeling very well the night before. He had a low-grade fever. He was drooling a lot. And I put a mattress pad directly under him because I was a little bit concerned about the drool. And we thought, well, if he's not doing better tomorrow, we'll take him into the doctor. At the same time, I had a dog that was taking a bad turn and getting really sick. And so the next morning, I went into, actually before that even happened, we got my grandson ready for school, got him off. My husband came to get me and said, hey, the dog took a turn. I think you need to look at him. I looked at the dog. He couldn't lift his head. I took him to the closest vet just down the road. And my husband continued to get my grandson ready for school, got him to the bus. And then my 17-year-old daughter waited for me to come home because we didn't want to leave the baby alone who was still sleeping. So she waited for me to come home, and then she was getting ready to go to school. I had the bottle prepared with the Smooth Move laxative tea in it and was going to his room. I set the bottle on the table. I went into his room to get him, and when I looked down into his bed, it looked like he hadn't moved it all night. He had the Thomas the Train blanket still draped over his shoulders. It looked like it hadn't moved at all. And I picked him up, and he was stone cold. He was rigid, and I yelled. My daughter was in the room right next door, just a thin wall between them. She came running over. I told her to call 911. And while I was holding him and she was calling 911, I called my husband, who had gone to work at the airport at the very same time, and was talking to him. So he freaked out, and he was with his supervisor and a couple other of the workers, and he told them what happened, and they said, just go. So he just came running home. By then, the fire department was here. Glory was on the phone with 911, and they were telling her, lay him on the ground, do this, do that, open his mouth, breathe. She said, I can't open his mouth, so it gives you an idea that the rigor mortis was pretty progressed. So anyway, then they all came on the scene. The DHS came, the sheriff's department came, the fire department came. They put us out into the driveway. They taped off the scene, like a crime scene. And then they gave us, sheets to fill out, incident reports, I guess you call them. And we filled those out. And so for hours, we waited. We were interviewed by the DHS as well. And my son came he was going to school in Edmond, so he rushed in, and when the day was over, we realized that we were going to have to break the news to my daughter, who was the mother of Elijah. And so we drove to Freedom House Teen Challenge, where she had checked herself in to get help. I think the baby was probably 4 or 6 weeks old when she reached out for help again, and she went back there. She really wanted to lick this thing, this, addiction thing, and she really wanted to be the mother she was called to be. So even though it was a long program, it wasn't a 30-day program or 60-day program, she knew she was committing to a year when she went because she really wanted to change. And then she ended up staying on for an extra year to go into the leadership training program. So anyway, during that beginning of that second year, I believe, when she went into the leadership training program was when all this happened. So when the day was over and they took, the tape out of the yard and all that stuff, the family gathered and we all had called ahead and we went to Teen Challenge to break the news to my daughter. And the director had already set everything up and was ready for us to come. And so we came and we told her what happened. And my husband mainly did most of the talking, and he just collapsed in her lap, which was hard for everyone because he's not generally a really emotional guy, but this wrecked him, So anyway, she came home with us, and relatives started pouring in for the funeral and all that. Well, the next day, it was a Saturday, we were here, and my youngest daughter went to Life Church, and she mentored the younger girls, was really into that. So my family went to the Saturday evening service, I think the 4 o'clock service. I stayed behind to get the house ready for all the relatives, and his sister was here, and brother-in-law, and so my grandson and daughter, and they went to church. So I got a knock at the door. there's 10 vehicles, SUVs out there from Wagner County. And the detective comes in and he's like, where's your husband? Where's your family? I said, they're at church. He said, get them home. So I texted him. I said, hey, the detective's here. They want to talk to us. So they left the service and came home. And so they put everybody out, and then they swabbed our mouths and swabbed under our fingernails. My youngest daughter and Glory, she's an adult now, Bill and I. They took our computers, they took our phones, and then they asked us to come down to the station so that we could be questioned. And so they took us all down in separate vehicles. Well, my youngest daughter drove herself. We went down and they questioned my Glory first. She was just overwhelmed. She was like, what's happening? What's happening? And then me, and then Bill. And it was about halfway through my questioning when I realized, a light bulb went off and I realized what was going on, because the detective was asking me questions like, do you ever remember feeling like something was off or being concerned about something? And I said, well, yeah, he had this terrible diaper rash sometimes and it would bleed. He said, no, not that, And I was like, well, you mean like when he had the really constipation problem? No, not that, And he kept doing that, and finally I thought, I'm like, he's looking for something nefarious, I was just like, okay, so now I realize they're looking at my husband in a really evil way. And the tone of the interview, I felt like it really changed. And I was like, oh my gosh, my poor husband, So anyway, then they interviewed him, and apparently his became very accusatory.
As this unfolded, we got to know some more people. And one of the things that the detective said under oath, and also other people verified, was he wasn't on scene at first. He was called in as an investigator to investigate. Every infant that dies on this is considered an investigating scene to see what's going on. Well, on his route here, he was talking to the supervisor on duty, Kyle Johnson, and in the conversation as him driving here, he said that babies just don't die. SIDS is a fallacy and it doesn't exist. So therefore, I'm coming to a murder scene. He hadn't even been here yet, and he already labeled this as Elijah's death as a murder.
Right.
And so that pretty much steered his investigation from the very beginning. And everything he looked through the lens of murder. And he also has some baggage in his history of life that made him, in his own words, acute to child abuse.
He was an abused child.
And especially with Christians. And, the whole scene was under the guise of investigation as murder and assault from the very beginning.
Which he said to Bill when he was here. He said, I knew this was a crime scene. I was like, what, So, yeah, it was set up like that. His whole mentality was to find what would confirm that. So what was strange is they had the, investigators go through the house with the black light and, search everything and look for fluids, and but they left so much behind. We had 2 of those garbage bins that you roll out to the curb to be picked up every week, big bins, and we discovered a day or 2 later that they left that behind. They opened it up, the trash bags, but they just left them in there loose, and there was probably up to 70 diapers untouched. And so we were like, why don't they want these diapers to be analyzed? It didn't make any sense to us. So my sister-in-law and some other relatives were here, and so they helped us, and we opened up every single diaper and looked at each diaper and actually took some pictures of the diapers opened up, and even the ones that showed the really hard stools that we were describing, And I sent them on to the DHS worker who was working with the sheriff's department and said, don't you want these, you know? So nobody showed any interest, and I thought they could have those analyzed, they could see what we're talking about, and they could, you know, there's going to be DNA in there if their accusations are correct, but nobody wanted them. So we just took several and we put them in the deep freeze and just bagged them, you know, 3 or 4 times, and we still have them.
I think
and they know about it, but they've never showed any interest.
I think the important thing about that is one of the accusations was that I molested Elijah, a 14-month-old baby, every day of his life. So if that's the case, don't you think logically diapers would be the find would be a gold mine of evidence?
Yeah.
Because it'd have to be blood, DNA, lubricant, something.
Latex, whatever, you know.
You know, something would be backing up their theory, and they didn't want them even after we tried to give them to them. They still wouldn't take them.
Yeah, there's a lot to that effect. I mean, I had over 20 journals with my life histories for the last 30 years sitting in my room. You would have thought they wanted those. My daughter's a hunter. She had 3, 4 guns in the house. I'm thinking, why would you leave guns behind if you believe someone's capable of murder, you know? Just lots of things. The mattress pad I described earlier that I put under him because he was drooling so much was heavy with fluid that must have leaked out of him, leaked out of his lungs. And they didn't take it. I would think they'd want to have that analyzed. The bottle that was sitting on the table with the smooth move tea in it, they left that. We have that in the freezer as well. Just so many things we just thought just didn't add up, and it was crazy. So what they did is they, you know, when they took us down to the station, I'm sorry, I'm just going to say how it feels. They kidnapped my grandson. And I understand in the beginning they had to check into these allegations. You know, I guess I understand that, you know, logically. But they took him to Kid Space in Muskogee, and they had a professional interviewer interview him. And the whole interview was recorded and exonerated us. But even before that interview was done, the day that we found the baby, the DHS officer went to the school, interviewed my grandson, and in the presence of his counselor, another woman, and they interviewed him, and supposedly, according to child experts who are expert interviewers of children, they say that the most dependable and reliable interviewer is going to be usually the first one, because there's no in this case there was no disruption in his life yet. He hadn't been taken from his home. He didn't know his brother was gone. Everything was normal to him, and he's like, "Oh, these adults are coming to talk to me," you know. So it was very telling because they asked quite direct questions like, "Did you ever get hurt in your home? Did you always feel safe?" And yes. "Did your brother ever get hurt? Who protected you in your home? You know, Papa and Grandma protected me. Was your home? Would you tell somebody if you ever didn't feel safe?" "Yes, I would tell my teacher," or you know. Were there more smiley faces in your home, or was there more sad faces? He said smiley faces. I mean, he was just very forthcoming and very honest. And so that was his very, very, very first interview before the forensic interview. Then he had the forensic interview, which was clean. While this forensic interview was going on at Kid Space in Muskogee, we were down at the station getting questioned. Bill was being questioned at that time. And the detective's phone kept dinging. And he said to Bill in the interview, he said, "Hear my phone continue to ding. That's the interviewers telling me what your grandson is telling them about what you did, basically." So, anyway, he's keeping in correspondence with these interviewers, which I don't think he should have been. I don't think he should have been influencing them at all. But apparently that forensic interview exonerated us, which then they decided to give him a sane nurse exam, sexual abuse nurse examiner, who's supposed to do a physical exam. And she checks him out, finds no nothing on him. Clean rape kit. Same thing with Elijah's rape kit. So she, and then she says she wouldn't, she had the option to take recording equipment that is offered at the center, and she chose not to take it. We've talked to the person who trained her since then and found out that she had every right to take it, but she chose not to take it. And she says that all of a sudden,
Before that,
my grandson just came out with all these crazy allegations, opposite of everything he'd said so
I
far.
want to interject here with something that her exam covered him physically, emotionally, and psychologically. And all three of those she documented. There was no
Signs of trauma.
reason to refer him to any expert outside of what her exam.
No aftercare.
There was no physical signs of abuse. There was no emotional signs of abuse. There was no psychological signs that they're trained to pick up. So therefore, she had no reason to suspect anything was traumatizing him in his past.
And we just thought that was crazy because the allegations were that he watched his brother be raped every day, but he wasn't traumatized by that, or that he was raped in the shower, but he wasn't traumatized by that. One of the lawyers even had said at one point that she thought he watched his brother be killed in cold blood. I'm like, okay, and he wasn't traumatized by that. They said he was normal, so it didn't make any sense. She wrote a handwritten report from memory, which when we went through it, it was just 1 page plus an extra sentence, and there was about 25 problems in it right off the bat, that because we know our grandson, we know he couldn't have done that, he couldn't have said that, he wouldn't have had knowledge of that, things like that. So we have a whole list of things that are, and some of them physically impossible, that she put in there and contradicted herself all over the place. She was a mess on the witness stand at the prelim. After we were put in jail for, our very first time in jail was for 4 months, and it was based on supposedly our grandson saying that Papa's privates touched his butt one time in the shower. Well, he rarely took showers, but if he did wet the bed and we wanted to get the pee smell off of him before school, I'd hand him off to Bill while he was showering to get ready for work, and he'd rinse him off and hand him back to me. So that didn't happen very often. My grandson preferred to take baths because he didn't like the water splashing in his eyes, and he wanted to play with his toys and stuff. So anyway, here we are, going to jail because he said one time Papa's privates touched his butt one time in the shower. So for 4 months we go to jail for that.
We were at a $500,000 bond for each one of us, so we couldn't bail out.
And we're just in solitary confinement. We didn't get to, nobody could be in there with us, so we couldn't talk to anybody. We had nothing. All you have is a blanket and a metal cot with a thin little thing on it, and that's your existence.
Well, I'd like to back up just a minute, because our grandson, who was 5 at the time, had his entire time of when he was talking, had a very bad speech impediment. It was very difficult to understand when he would speak to you because it wasn't clear. And the sane nurse under oath swore that he had no speech impediment. You couldn't talk to him more than 10 seconds before you're like, wait a minute, what did you say? Yeah. We were trained to hear him, and we had troubles understanding. So it's impossible for her to have had him speak without having this. And then the forensic interview that was videotaped was countless times she had to stop him. Do you repeat that? And what are you saying? Sometimes she couldn't even figure it out.
Right.
And so she would just go on. So.
And then when the same nurse wrote a report, had my grandson speaking some kind of street slang, ebonics, like, what did the baby do when Papa was doing this to him? And then supposedly my grandson would say, he be crying and crying. I was like, at that point I was like, okay, they interviewed the wrong child. That explains everything, And then I realized after looking at the documents that they interviewed the right child, but she's quoting him as speaking in a way that he doesn't know how to speak. And there's just I could just go on. There's probably about 25 big problems with her one-page handwritten report.
I think one of the issues where the detective was so determined to make this fit that there was murder and assault that he influenced everybody he came in contact with, putting a lot of pressure. This woman, the same nurse, was very inexperienced and very young.
No.
And this is part-time. She was a nurse, but this is part-time work for her. And I think she was under the pressure to have to come up with something, because her responsibilities were not to interview. She's not a child interviewer. She's not trained, and that's just not the way it's supposed to be in a sane nurse. And what happened was, she said it just spontaneously started saying all this. He never spontaneously ever started giving information out.
It's just
That was
like
not his
that.
personality or the way he was. You have to pry things out of him.
Right. He's just a boy. All he wants to do is have fun and play. Right.
When we were down at the station on when they were interviewing all of us, it didn't take very long for the detective to basically accuse me of murdering my grandson. He he ruled out any possibility of somebody coming from the outside in, because he started asking me all kinds of questions. Well, were the doors locked, windows locked? I think they were all locked. I usually check the doors. I don't go around the house and check all the windows, but we normally keep them locked. There was no sign of entry from anybody, so therefore he eliminates that. And he says this child was murdered. And he says there's there's a left-handed person held him down while sodomizing him and suffocated him to death. And I'm left-handed, so obviously he had known that. And he said there's a bruised handprint on the back of his neck, and he said it's under the skin, so you can only see it, through the right lights. Well, that was totally false. There was no handprint. There was no bruising on the back of his neck. There was one little mark. It measured 1/4 by 1/4 inch in diameter, and it wasn't what they said it was.
Right.
And so he came at me in a very hostile way, and everything he asked me was, well, why do you think he died? And I said, I don't know. I really have no idea. He asked me about his if he had any problems. I explained. We all said the consistency, that he had, drooled a lot. He had constipation constantly, chronic constipation. And there was, in no time did I ever feel like I was innocent. I felt like I was already guilty of doing this heinous crime. I mean, there is no worse crime than murdering a baby and sexually assaulting a 14-month-old baby. There is nothing worse than that. And so I was in shock. They actually interviewed me a second time after we were already in jail, and I can't even remember that interview. I mean, I've seen it, so I know it exists, but my memories are all nothing there. I can't
totally
recall
in
it
shock.
and anything. So it was rather traumatic in this situation, because we've never been in this situation. We have never been arrested. We've never been accused of any crimes. The worst thing we ever had was a speeding ticket or an accident. So we weren't accustomed to any of this.
Right.
And I didn't know better not to speak. I mean, I had nothing to hide.
Yeah.
So I shared everything that I could think of and spoke honestly and truthfully, and nothing in there implicated anything. And he was very frustrated with that.
Yeah, I believe that.
He kept saying, it's going to go better for you if you just tell us the truth. Tell us why you did it. Just admit it. Just admit it. Just admit it. No, that's not what happened.
Right.
So his bias directed everything about him.
Totally, yeah. And then so after we had our preliminary hearing 4 months after we'd been in jail for 4 months, and they questioned the same nurse, and she was cross-examined all day long and found all kinds of holes. So we each had, like he said, a $500,000 bond, and they lowered my bond by 90%, which the attorneys said never happens. So we were out that day, which was July 31st of 2018, and we were out for 4 months, and then 4 months later, just before Christmas, they brought the charge of murder and sexual assault for baby Elijah.
First degree murder.
Yeah, first degree murder. So just before Christmas, we were rearrested for 4 more months. But just before that, they'd taken my youngest daughter to a multi-county grand jury hearing and told her that she was a suspect because she was home, and that she could be arrested too. And the DA said, you know, the detective really wants you to be arrested too, but I'm trying to hold him back. But if you'll just work with us, and we'll give you immunity. So she went to this grand jury, multi-county grand jury hearing, and was questioned by, I think there's 18, it's not 12, like 18 people. They're usually doctors and lawyers and all these important people from the community, different communities. And so during that questioning, she's allowed to answer the questions without being interrupted. So they asked her questions. How do you think the baby died? She said, I really don't know. I'm not a doctor. And she said, but I do have concerns. And they're like what? And so she just started to share about how the ME's offices in Oklahoma, all of Oklahoma, not just Tulsa, are unaccredited, lost their accreditation 12 years ago and never been able to regain it. Their eyes about popped out of their head. She told them about the diapers and the pictures that we'd sent of the diapers and how they didn't want them. They were shocked again. And the DA was in the back of the room with the ADA, and she said he was red in the face. He stood up, he's stomping around. I think he wanted her to stop talking, But anyway, in the end, they did not give an indictment. And I don't know what you know about grand jury hearings, but we didn't know anything about them. But apparently they're one-sided hearings where only the prosecution gets to present whatever they want, whatever witnesses they want, whatever evidence they want, any amount they want, spin it any way they want, and then the idea is to see if they have enough to get an indictment to move forward. And I think they wanted, I don't know why they took 9 months, if they were so sure of that ME report that they had in the beginning and the same nurse report. Why did it take 9 months to bring a charge? I think maybe it's because they wanted a grand jury to pull the trigger instead so that they could say, well, we didn't want to do it. The grand jury is the ones who wanted to do it. We had to do it, but it backfired. And so it never happened. But they still decided to arrest us anyway. So we were there for a different hearing, for a motions hearing, a motion to dismiss based on the pathetic lack of evidence. And turns out to be another arrest date, so they arrested us. We went back to jail.
It was a setup.
For
It
4
was
years.
December 20th,
Yeah.
right before Christmas.
Yeah.
It was a setup. The whole thing was a setup just to arrest us.
Yeah, that's what we
And
think.
so we got charged for first degree murder for both of us. And I was charged with 2 counts of sexually assaulting a minor under 12. And she was charged with 2 counts of enabling sexual assault.
Right. So I had the $500,000 bond. This time he has an unlimited
I didn't have a bond. They didn't
He
give
wasn't
me a
supposed to
bond.
get out. So we sat there for 4 more months, which I will say the Lord did do a lot during that time, as much as I hated every minute of it. When we had another preliminary hearing. This time we had 2 full days. So March 26th of 2019 and March 29th. The first day they had the detective on the stand, and he was all over the map and couldn't remember anything, and they had to shut the hearing down so that he could go and review things for a few hours to refresh his memory. And he said he was an expert on SIDS, and it turned out he had maybe an hour of training about SIDS, and just all kinds of craziness. And then there was the other person that was interviewed was my daughter, my youngest daughter. And so there wasn't a dry eye in the place when she got done. And then the second day, we had the chief medical examiner of Detroit, who is a published child abuse expert and the chief medical examiner in that whole region for several counties, or at least two. He came, he had reviewed all the records, he'd reviewed the slides, he reviewed everything, and he came and testified all day long and was cross-examined. He just said, this did not happen. There's just no evidence to support it. For instance, when a baby is suffocated, as we were accused, there's all kinds of telltale signs like petechiae, little broken blood vessels in your eye from struggling, or there can be petechiae in other places. There was none of that. His eyes were clear. There was no fabric depressions like you would find if you're pushed down. There's usually going to be some faint marks of the fabric. There's going to be faint, hand marks maybe on the back of the head. You wouldn't hold a baby on his shoulder if you were going to suffocate him, because then he could still spin his head around. The detective had said that, there was a left-handed print on his shoulder, which of course there wasn't. There was none of there's supposed to be, when someone's suffocated, there's going to be deformity to the high points of the face, the nose, the chin, depression marks, none of that. They said there was all these lacerations to the lips, lacerations to the anus. There was none of that. They showed the pictures on the screen in the courtroom, this big giant screen. None of that existed. So here we are, sitting there in court, the poor grandparents, paternal grandparents, wondering what in the world's going on, It was good for them to see it. So as it turned out, there was no lacerations to the mouth. There was, I guess, a tiny, 1/8 inch by 8 inch mark on the frenulum that they think happened from a toothbrush or a toy putting in his mouth. It wasn't, no bruising or anything. They said it was so insignificant that he wouldn't have even tested it. And he's an expert on child deaths, so just didn't exist. Then as it pertains to the left hand shaped print on the back of his shoulder, there was a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch little spot on his upper shoulder, and then just below that a little bit larger one. So apparently when they did the autopsy, they pulled the skin back, and the upper one was bright cherry red, and the other one was like a gray color with striations in it. And so they questioned the expert about that, and he said, well, for one thing, whatever happened here didn't happen at the same time because they're two different colors. And he said the fact that the one is bright cherry red, he said, that looks like, he had a name for it. It's when ME accidentally cuts a capillary when she's doing the autopsy, and a little bit of blood is still in there and leaks out. And he had a name for that, and he said that's what that looks like. He said the other one, he said, I'm not sure what it is, but it looks like it could be a vascular tumor. So both of those were irrelevant. And then when they got to the diaper area, it turned out there was not a single laceration there, and she didn't take slides. She's supposed to take, the ME's supposed to take samples. So anytime you allege that there was an injury here, you take a section of it so that you can see if there actually was bruising, hemorrhaging, or if it was a birthmark or what it was. To distinguish it, you take a section, you put it on a slide. She didn't take anything of the mouth. She didn't take anything of the back. She only took one from the anus, on part of the anus. I guess all the slides were not numbered, they were not labeled, they were broke. Some of them were broken, they were all in disarray. But none of them had any signs of lacerations, bruising, hemorrhaging, anything.
One of the remarkable things I thought that the expert pointed out was when you do a cutting of a sample, you do it so that you can determine if it's, like in the anus area, if it's an actual tear or if it's just something else. Well, you also have different layers of skin, and you're supposed to determine, first off, like a face of a clock, what position it's from,
Yeah.
and then how deep does it go, and how wide is it, the dimensions of it. Well, she didn't document any of it, and he says that remarkably, he was just like dumbfounded. That's just so normal practice that she didn't do it. So what it did was it did determine, he was unable to determine how deep everything was, and and what position it came from.
Right.
But from the slides that they did take, he determined there was nothing but normal normal conditions, which would, he said there's also
Completely normal
signs,
anus.
very strong signs of hemorrhoids, because
Pre-hemorrhoids.
of there was like a blood vessel that had congestion in it, and it was, bigger than normal, and it looked like a bruise. Really, it looked like a bruise. And he says that's very indicative of a hemorrhoid, which would confirm the constipation problem that this child had. And the difference between, she called them lacerations. A laceration is actually a tearing of the skin where there would be bleeding.
Right.
But they were fissures, which is something that somebody who has constipation would acquire, fissures. So he said that's what these show, in the slides show fissures, not lacerations.
I think there was only one that we saw in the pictures, and it's just a skin tone because the fissure isn't very deep.
No, it's
so it
just,
doesn't cause. There's no bleeding.
There's
anything.
there's no tearing of the tissue at all. So therefore, he determined none of this is real. None of this is true.
Says
what
that's
they
a
said.
completely normal anus, and that's a completely normal mouth. Everything about it is completely normal. So
The other remarkable
they couldn't.
thing.
I was just going to say they couldn't do anything with his credentials. Were incredible. I mean, he was really, really hard to refute because he's just one of the top experts in the United States.
Yeah, he said he's testified over 500 times for the prosecution, and only a couple times for the defense, and we're one of them. So he was remarkable in his testimony. The very first picture that we saw of our scene of the home here was when the coroner came, and she took the diaper off, and the very first picture shows a golf ball size hard dry stool, half in and half out. It had broken in half, and half was in the diaper and the other half was still in his rectum, confirming exactly what we've been saying. And if there was any chance of sexual abuse in the sense of sodomy, there would not be anything in his passageway.
Right. And the ME took a x-ray of him, and when you zoom in on the pelvis area, you can see that his rectum is full of stool. You can see the pattern of it and the twists and turns
Undisturbed.
in it. Undisturbed, the pattern unbroken. He's full. So anyway, when they took Elijah's body to the ME office, the detective attended. And he didn't just attend in another room. He actually was alone with the medical examiner doing the autopsy in that room. I'm sure there were people in and out, but my understanding it was him and her in there. And
there was another doctor in there too.
Yeah, but I don't think they were there the whole time. So anyway, apparently she took some pictures and sent them to some other doctor and said, "Don't you think this is abuse?" And he's like, "Yeah, that's abuse." And so they said, 2 experts said the same thing. Turns out, as we talked to this other doctor, he's like, "I don't remember that." So I don't know what happened there, but
the whole thing that came against us, the only evidence they have is a 5-year-old's supposed testimony to unrecorded, undocumented, other than handwritten confession of some things that took place, and an ME report that concludes suffocation and sodomy. Now, there was no DNA to support it.
Right.
There was no evidence at all in our home to support it. There was no evidence on our phones or laptops. This is something that I didn't realize till afterwards. I had an iPad, and I used to work at a hotel, and one of my friends from work gave me the iPad, and I had never done anything with it except for replace the glass because it was all busted up. And so I didn't even know what was on that thing. Who knows what could have been on there? So, but nothing was.
They confiscated it.
Anyway, they confiscated everything. They forensically went through it all. They forensically went through our house. There was absolutely no supporting documentation of evidence to substantiate their claims. That's all they had was those 2 pieces.
So they just marched on forward.
When we were talking about the child interviews,
We talked about the interview that he had at school, the initial interview, and then after that, the first recorded forensic interview, and then the same nurse interview that wasn't recorded. Well, after the DA heard about the same nurse interview where supposedly he just came up with all this stuff on his own and starts blurting it out, he wanted to get it on tape. So he had the top forensic interviewer come in and do another forensic interview with him 4 days later. And in this interview, she's trying so hard to get him to come forth with the same things that he supposedly said to the same nurse, and it's not working. And they're getting towards the end of the interview, and she says to him, you know you can trust me, right? You know you can tell me anything, right? And he's like, yeah, I just want to play. Can we be done now? Yeah, no, we have a few more questions. And then she finally says, well, didn't you just tell the nurse the other day about brother's privates and brother's butt and what happened? And he said no. He said he never had that conversation with her. And that interview was hidden. The DA, ADA, whoever, hid it for almost a year. We didn't know. It said in the discovery, it said, I, Jake Kelly, took the 5-year-old victim to Kids Space in Muskogee for a second forensic interview on 4/4/18. So every time we sent our lawyers to go fetch it, they'd ask for it, and they'd say, oh, that's just a mistake. That's a typo. That doesn't really exist. And turns out it did exist, and they turned it over just a few days before the second prelim, and nobody listened to it until afterwards. But that would have settled this thing in the very beginning if they had not hidden it. And another thing that's very interesting in that interview is in the first few pages, he says that somebody in his foster home hurt him. And she passes it off and just keeps going and doesn't question him as to who hurt you, how did they hurt you, or anything like that. It isn't investigated or looked into at all. It's just because she was so, it seemed her mindset was to get something on us, and so she was willing to let go statements like that really should have been investigated. Altogether, we found 6 interviews. Now, you're only supposed to give 1 to a child, but there was different DHS workers that just seemed to help themselves to interviewing him, and each interview, all the interviews, there was nothing against any of us or against us in the interviews except for the one that wasn't recorded. In fact, most of them come right out and say, nobody was ever hurt, nothing ever happened, I was safe, and exonerated us. But they chose to not mention any of those and focus on that one that supported what the detective said happened.
Tell him about the foster mom trying to convince him.
Oh, yeah. When he was in his first foster home, he said, I want to go back to Papa and Grandma's. And she said, no, you don't. Remember all the horrible things Papa did to you? And starts talking to him about that. He looked at her and he says, well, I don't remember what her name was, Angela or something. Yeah. He looked at her and he said, no, Angela. And then he got really quiet. And after that, his counselor said that whenever she brought up family or anything, he'd hide under the desk. I think he felt ashamed, like, why is she having everyone's having such a big reaction when I ask for this? Am I asking for something bad? So, but he's been seeing all this time, he's been seeing these professional sex abuse counselors, and they've said that there's never been one disclosure. He's only spoken well of his family. He's never said anything about this. He's now with his second counselor, who he's had for probably just over a year. She said, no, he only speaks well of the family, speaks well of his mother. He's never made a single allegation or accusation.
The thing that struck me was, what was his name, the ADA?
Oh, John Bennett.
John Bennett. Yeah. He was brought in because he was the sexual assault expert and medical kind of expert, kind of the ADA. Anyway, they had agreed to allow our bond. I had no bond. And remember, this is first degree murder, sexual assault of a minor under 12, two counts. She had a $500,000 bond. And so they had agreed to allow us to get out on bond for $25,000 each. Yeah. Well, he stands up at the very end and says, Your Honor, before you rule on this, let's just combine it to $25,000 for both of them. On a first-degree murder and a sexual assault, there's no way they believed we were guilty at that time.
Yeah.
There was no way, but they refuse to drop it. They
Tell them about
continue to go on.
getting out of jail because we like to share.
Yeah, and then this is a Friday, late Friday afternoon, 4 or 5 o'clock. So everybody disperses and goes home at that time. So we're back in our pods and getting ready to leave on bond because my sister was going to go get the bond money. And so they botched the paperwork. They messed up the paperwork. So this is Friday afternoon, and we're sitting in there, and then nobody's coming. They had already canceled our account, so we can't make phone calls. So nobody's coming. And then finally, about 2 or 3 hours later, they come up and say, well, you're not getting out today. They messed up the paperwork. We can't get it right. And there's no judge is going to come down between now and Monday and fix it. So you're going to be here till Monday. Right. So we're like, great. And so Saturday comes, and our judge, Luton, calls the district judge, Kirkley, who Kirkley had already presided over our first preliminary hearing. So he knows more, a lot about us. He comes down on a Saturday over an hour drive to fix the paperwork and drives home so we can get out on bond. What judge would do that for murder?
The guards were like, this never happened.
This has never happened before. So, I mean, all these things just show and give you indications that they don't really believe their charges.
Right.
But the sad thing is, they're so bound to the system that they're not willing to let it go.
In November, after we'd been out for a while, they offered us a plea. I think it was something, they asked our lawyers, would they take like involuntary manslaughter, no jail time, just, and our attorneys were like, no, they're not going to take anything. They're not going to take jaywalking, So they passed on that, but they were testing the waters, I think. And then Dr. Block came along. Dr. Block is a world-recognized child abuse expert and pediatrician. He founded the Justice Center in Tulsa for abused children. He's testified hundreds of times in court, helped all the court systems around here win many, many cases.
Prosecutions.
Yeah, prosecution. What happened is he looked at the records and looked at all the medical, everything. He interviewed us, and he was like, wow, this didn't happen. He could see from the evidence that there's no way this happened. So he wrote a letter to them and said, I think the local ME was wrong, and explained everything. And at that time, they decided that they were going to finally drop the charges. I mean, he's so well respected, and he's helped them win hundreds of cases. Mm-hmm. So they decided they were going to drop the charges. That was in June. And so in June, they dropped all the murder and all the molestation charges, and they implemented new charges of felony neglect. And there was this 29-point affidavit that apparently the detective put together. None of it made sense, and all of it was easy to refute, but he takes it to the judge, who rubber stamps it. They failed to check jurisdiction. It didn't have jurisdiction. Then they also accused my daughter of the same thing, so she had 2 counts against her. They run out and arrest her immediately, and she has no idea this is coming, and all of a sudden she's thrown in jail and totally freaking out. We're like, oh my God. So I think this is what I believe. It's taken me a long time. It's hard for both of us to get into their heads, because this kind of thinking is beyond us.
Yeah,
but trying to understand what they could be thinking and why the truth doesn't matter, it's been beyond us. We just haven't been able to figure it out. And in this case, when they arrested my daughter, I really believe, I've come to the conclusion that they arrested her for something that would have happened had it happened, which it didn't even happen. Neither did they have jurisdiction for it. 3 years and 7 months earlier. So they also didn't have the statute of limitations, because the statute of limitations for neglect is 3 years. So they failed on those 2 fatal flaws. But they arrested her, and I think the reason they did is because they thought that would get to us because we would say, okay, we'll take a plea, just don't hurt our child. And I really believe that was the leverage that they were looking to use.
The sequence of events is remarkable because when they brought the neglect charges, they didn't use any of the detectives' 29 points. They concluded that there's 2 counts of neglect on our daughter, and we had 1 count of neglect and 1 count of enabling neglect. And the neglect charges, felony neglect charges, the sentence ranges from 1 year to life in prison. So it's not a minor; it's a serious offense. And the charges were that the judge signed off on were for taking drugs while the baby is while she's pregnant, and then not taking the baby after he was born to the doctor enough. And we've taken him to see a doctor 5 times in a 14-month life. And so they determined that wasn't enough, so that was neglect, medical neglect. And they failed when to me it just baffles me because the professionalism is so bad on their part that they didn't even check major things for bringing charges. Do we have jurisdiction? They didn't even look into jurisdiction. Right. They assumed we lived here. Mm-hmm. We lived in Tulsa County when this all happened, with the baby during the pregnancy and after the baby was born. Right. And so our attorneys put a motion to dismiss the neglect charges for they call it lack of venue, no jurisdiction. Well, when they saw that, they realized they were in a lot of trouble. They couldn't pin Desiree in Wagner County anytime doing drugs while she was pregnant. And so, therefore, they they amended the charges and changed the dates, not from the time she was pregnant, but to the time until he died. And therefore, when they did that, they didn't even look into the law because neglect charges are only good for 3 years. Statute of limitations runs out after 3 years. Well, the statute had run out 7 months prior. Right. And so they were past the statute of limitations. Mm-hmm. So our attorneys filed another motion to dismiss based on that. And the judge said, well, I'm going to give the prosecution almost a month.
Yeah. There's got to back up a little bit because when they dropped the murder and the molestation charges and implemented the neglect charges, we went to get my daughter out of jail. We went to get her out of jail, and there was a bond reduction hearing, and so they were arguing to keep her, and we were arguing to get her out and send her to a program because she was floundering. And so she wanted to go get help. She wanted to go regain her footing, basically. But after that bond reduction hearing was over, my daughter's attorney stayed behind and chit-chatted with the ADA, who was prosecuting us for the felony charges of neglect, and the ADA, who was over my daughter's DHS case. And they were saying to him, or he was saying to them, asking them questions like, how in the world did a detective get so much power to single-handedly run a county like this? How did that? And she wouldn't answer him. And then he said, what's your end game? Do you just want the Woolleys in jail forever? And she said, oh, no, we don't want that. And we don't want to do anything to hurt their relationship with their grandson. We want them to be able to see each other. That was new. We'd never heard any talk like that before. And so he came out of there saying, you guys need to get a meeting with them because it sounds like they're ready to deal and ready to let you guys start seeing your grandson and him seeing his mom and stuff. So we were like, wow. And then about a week later, the ADA called Bill's attorney and said, I have an offer for your clients. If your clients will surrender custody of your grandson to the foster mom who desperately wants to adopt him, we will drop all these charges of felony neglect against all of you. And the foster mom will give generous visits to all of you. And at first, all I could think of is just I want to see him. I would almost do anything to see him again. But then, the reality started to come, and I started thinking, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. If they believe that we're guilty of felony neglect, how could they even offer us visits? It doesn't even make sense. They don't. Then it occurred to me, I was like, they don't believe these charges either. They pre-planned to put these charges in place so that they could use them for leverage to get us to take a deal, which is why the week before she was talking so nice to my daughter's attorney after the bond reduction hearing. Oh yeah, we want them to see each other. I think they were priming them, because then a week later they make this offer, and they knew, if they bring up our children and our grandchildren, they know that they're pulling on your heartstrings, So anyway, meanwhile, right at that time, Desiree got a different attorney, somebody who specializes in juvenile. So that attorney came in and said, Bill's attorney says, sure, send me that in writing and we'll talk to them about it on Monday. So Monday comes, and Desiree's got her new attorney, and his attorney's there, and Desiree's attorney is now my attorney as well. And it's not there, the offer's not there, so they call her and say, hey, where's the offer? We're all here ready to discuss it, because they wanted it in writing, because that's unethical. Well, they call her, and she talks like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking. So she's acting like she never said it, but she'd already talked that way to one attorney, and then to another attorney. So there's two witnesses there. But I just wanted to fill that in, because I thought that was a form of child abuse, child trafficking that I never heard of before. That using children for leverage to gain advantage. I was just dumbfounded. My grandson has been so used for political gain. I mean, other attorneys, ADAs, had said throughout the last couple of years, they'd come out of a court hearing with my daughter, DHS hearing, trying to dissolve her parental rights based on nothing, which we have an email that proves they had nothing, because the DHS worker said, I don't have a cause, I don't know what to tell the judge, help me make something up. So we have that email where she's reaching out to her supervisor. But anyway, just this one ADA on the way out of court, when they were not able to get her parental rights dissolved, said to my daughter's attorney, darn, I was really hoping I could get those parental rights dissolved today so that we could take this case and use it against Bill and Lisa Woolley in their criminal case. So it's all like power grabs, and he's had some of the top experts give psychosexual evaluations and physical response tests, some of the most respected doctors in the area. Altogether, 7 different tests, and one of them they combined with like a lie detector test. Passed them all, not just barely passed them all, but passed them all cleanly. They're aware that some of those tests have been taken, and they ignore that evidence too. We've sent them the experts' reports, we've sent them the results of these tests, and we've sent them so much stuff, and it's just like
they're not after the truth. They're really holding on to trying to get some kind of conviction, which doesn't make sense to me. But getting back to the without the venue or jurisdiction issue, they changed the dates to incorporate Wagner County in it also. And in doing that, they didn't even look at the expiration date of the whole charges. And so during the motion hearing, the judge ruled that, well, we're going to give them almost a whole month to come up with a way around the statute of limitations. Well, they were unable to. And so the day before, we were supposed to have our motions hearing to rule on that. In December 1st of this year. The ADA, Marnie Hill, changes and amends the charges one more time the second time and all she did was change the word neglect and erased it and put abuse. Well, in doing that, she created her own law. It doesn't exist
45 years.
because abuse has a statute of limitations of 45 years till the victim turns 45 years old or would have turned 45 years old. So that would have gotten around that. But the problem is abuse is not neglect. They're two separate laws. That's why they have two different statute of limitations. There's two different reasonings for the law. Well, without changing the neglect charges to be abuse, which she couldn't, she just changed the name. So she literally combined two laws into one to get around that. And they're still holding fast to that.
Yeah. December 1st, we went in, and the judge was supposed to rule to either drop all the charges or see if she had some way to get around this ironclad law. And we get in there, and Bill's attorney cites law after law after law that's being broken if they try to proceed based on nothing, since they have nothing legal to stand on. Then my attorney has her turn. She cites all these laws and rules. And then the ADA, Marnie, has her turn, and she cites none, no reason. She says she wants a preliminary hearing. The judge says, I deny your motion, and I'm going to give Marnie what she wants. So here we are waiting for a prelim that was supposed to happen this Tuesday, but it's been bumped out again.
But she said
so
during
we
that,
don't know how long that's going to take.
she said during that, she goes, if we can't substantiate these charges at the preliminary hearing, then we're going to drop the charges. She already intends to, that's her only recourse, because they can't defend what they've done.
Right. And they were challenged. Our attorneys got very upset, which I had never seen them that upset before, but they said, this is an abuse. He said, Your Honor, this is an abuse of your power on the bench, and you have no legal standing to push this forward, and it's an abuse of the state's power, and there will be repercussions. This is not going to go. This is not going to fly. And just really challenged them, but they just
Ignored
they
it.
work together. They circle the wagons. They support each other, and you just realize it's very hard for me. I know I've spent the last year just dealing with a lot of grief, and the grief was just that what I grew up believing was a lie, and what I taught my children was a lie. That was really hard to let that die inside of you, that whole idea that they're there for you and they're all about truth and justice, and to find out that it's not that. It's about not looking bad. It's about getting reelected, getting the convictions. And it's like, how did they get so lost and lose their way? Because I bet a lot of them started out with the best of intentions, like all of us, like we want to help people. And then somewhere along the way they get caught up in the system and don't even realize they're part of the corruption, the swamp that needs to be drained. And I think that's where we're at right now. But I've recently come to the conclusion that I think what they're doing right now, and I could be wrong, but I think what they're doing right now is they're trying to stall till June. Because I think they're afraid that we're going to bring a malicious prosecution charge, and you only have 1 year to do that. And since the initial charges were dropped in June, if they can push us out to June, then they can't get sued for one of the biggest lawsuits that they will have ever seen if we were to do something like that. They don't really realize that what we really want, we want our family back.
Our name back.
Our good name. Yeah. We lived a very social life. Like, we're not hidden. We don't just, which I guess is common for abusers. They don't want anyone to find out, and so they keep their kids close, and they don't let them get involved in sports and go to activities as much and all that kind of stuff. But we've always been very social, and there's probably been almost 20 people, most of them professionals. For instance, one lady who was a supervisor with she used to head up the Laura Dester House for Abused Children in Tulsa, 34 years with the DHS as an investigator, and she also trained and led a team of investigators for allegations of abuse, of neglect. And she watched the boys grow up, and there were also nurses and licensed child care, mandated reporters. Almost all of them were mandated reporters that have written court documents, have written sworn testimony, letters saying, I took care of this child. I never saw anything, like the baby probably 5 to 7 times a week was taken care of by other people who changed his diaper at the daycare place, at 2 church nurseries, at his paternal grandparents. He was constantly seen. Nobody ever had a concern. Nobody ever saw a mark on him. No one ever saw that any kind of neglect or abuse. It's the same thing with my older grandson. So we have this mounting stack of letters that is more things that are being ignored. These are things that they're aware of, but they're choosing to turn a blind eye to, and it's just dumbfounding. We can't even wrap our mind around this kind of thinking because it's so foreign to us. It's just so extremely foreign to us.
Happened when we first were released from jail our first time in. We were, I had just gotten home. My sister was there, and I started watching the news. She said, no, you don't want to watch the news because our story had been on the news quite a bit. Anyway, the sheriff held a press conference, and he was on, this is Channel 6 that I was watching, and he was in full uniform, sitting behind his desk, and he was talking about our case and, about our family and all that. And he said on television, and we haven't been charged with anything past the original charges. And he goes, it's obvious this family is a very tight-knit family. And he's going on and on. He goes, but one thing is for sure, somebody in that house killed that baby. And I think that is very irresponsible to put that out over the whole jury pool, to say something like that and influence a case that you know very little about, and we hadn't even been charged with those charges yet. So I just feel like that's very irresponsible on their end.
I agree. I mean, you destroy people's lives. It's like that story that you hear about this person who destroyed somebody's good name and reputation, and then went to the priest or whatever and said, I feel so bad for what I did to this person. How can I make it up to him? How can I? And apparently the priest said, well, I want you to go to the highest point of the city, some steeple or something, and I want you to take this feather pillow and I want you to open it up and just let it go to the 4 winds. And so she did that, came back and said, okay, now how can I make it right? I did what you said. And the priest said, now go collect all those feathers that went to the 4 winds. And when you've done that, you've made it right. And that's what it is. It's like you are treated and talked to and handled as if you are guilty. And even after your name is cleared, and even after even if they were guilty and they served their time, they're still branded for life. It's really horrible. The whole system is so messed up.
It's all geared towards convictions, and the thing that has cost us, this is what to me is the most grievous is loss of our grandson, the one that's still alive. He was 5 when this all began, and now he's 8. Yeah. So we were basically his parents because we raised him with our daughter, and she was very involved too. And we lost major years in his life that we never can get back. When we were arrested, our daughter was at Broken Arrow High School graduating. We missed her graduation. She played rugby. We missed her state. They won state championship in rugby. They went to nationals and they won national championship in rugby. We missed all of that. When I was in jail, my father died. We missed his funeral. We have been charged with, our family's been charged with 16 criminal felony charges. Not a one of them has been able to stick. They just keep changing them. It's cost us over $300,000 in lawyer fees and still mounting. We've spent over $500,000 just on the basics of these charges. Lisa lost her business. She had a Sheltie breeding business for how many years? You did that?
We raised show dogs for 15 years.
15 years. Had a great reputation. It all came down. I had just become a real estate agent, licensed real estate agent for less than a year. I lost that. I lost my job at the airport. We lost our inheritance. We lost. We haven't been at work for 3 years.
No health insurance.
We had to spend 8 months in jail, both of us.
We're getting ready to come into the 4th year of this here shortly. It's just, I'm astounded at how disconnected the people that are persecuting you are, because they don't seem to have any regard for life, that they are destroying lives. They're destroying children. You'll never, ever be the same. You'll never recover. Mm-mm. Murder stays on your record for life, even if you're exonerated.
Yeah,
for the rest of your life. And it's like, it's worth it to them it benefits them to believe that you're guilty and to hold on to that. Because if they say you're not, look at all they stand to lose. So they have to stand by. No matter how ridiculous it is, no matter how high the evidence, everything that we've said today, we have evidence for. I've shown you all those documents. Mm-hmm. I've got the diapers in the freezer. I've got the mattress pad. I've got everything there's nothing that we've said today that we can't substantiate with witnesses, with evidence, with documents. I don't think they can say that. But it just is mind-boggling, because I can't imagine being willing to lift a finger to destroy someone's life and say, well, I can't help it, my boss required it of me. It's like, you've got a higher boss that you're serving, and this boss is going to look like nothing in front of that boss. You know what I mean? It's just like, we have a society that's not living, they claim Christianity, but they're not living their lives unto the Lord. They're serving themselves, their own reputations, one another, a corrupt system. And it's not about doing what's right. And that's what is so heartrending and heartbreaking, because you want to believe that people are good, that if they just saw the truth, they'd do the right thing, and that they'd never be willing to let a child be hurt like my grandson's been hurt, or like our family's been hurt, or the way they've tried to keep us from our oldest daughter and tell her you can't have a relationship with your parents because it shows bad judgment, and how can you be a good parent if you'll let your child around murderers and rapists? And so they persecute her and try to keep her from having a relationship with us. So we haven't had the kind of relationship we should have, because, we're just always trying to do what they require, which never amounts to anything. We play by the rules, and they put a gag order on us. They can utilize the media all they want for their purposes, but as soon as somebody takes up for you on the media, they're going to put a protective order on you so that you can't speak, you can't build a defense, you can't do, and then they say, well, we don't want to corrupt the jury pool. Well, you've already done that. But it's only good if they can do it. But it's like, what's good for the goose isn't good for the gander. We see this kind of behavior on a national scale, and it's happening here in the counties as well. I would say I was so disappointed with the judge on December 1st. I've been disappointed all the time, because they're judges that aren't willing to judge, and they just play the game and keep things going. I would say that, honestly, I'd say they ripped my heart out. They ripped out the heart of my family. I wanted to believe, and I still want to believe, that people will do the right thing, and that law enforcement is good. that the judicial system is going to want to believe that. I would have got behind them. If they would have done the right thing, I would have campaigned for them. I would have, if I would just see a little bit of humility and say, hey, you know, we could have made a mistake. There's things we didn't look at. How far would that go in community relations with the law enforcement and the judicial system? If the community could see a little bit of humility and transparency, what kind of confidence would that bring in the community? People would be willing to help you instead of not speak up. And, you know, you see that a lot in different communities. People won't speak up because they don't believe they're going to get a fair shake. And I understand that now. I couldn't understand that before. But more than anything, like Bill alluded to earlier, we want our family back. We want our family back. It's all it's ever been about for us. It hasn't been about trying to hurt anybody. We don't want to hurt anybody. I would love the opportunity to be able to speak. I wish in my dreams I would have a courtroom with the DAs and all the people from the DA's office there, and the judges and the sheriff's department, the detective and the ME and the DHS workers all in one room. And I would just tell them our story. This is how we were affected. This is what it was like on our side. This is what happened to us, and give them a different perspective. How can my story, our story, help you guys not ever make a mistake like this again? I would give my story if you would utilize it for the good and utilize it so that you can do better in the future. I'm not about destroying anybody, destroying anybody's career. It's not my heart. It's not my goal. It's not our goal. But this cannot keep happening. This can't happen. It's not all right, and it's never going to be all right. So I guess that's kind of what I would say. And the only other thing is just that I believe that a lot of people got into this line of work to begin with because they really genuinely wanted to help people. But somewhere along the way, they just got caught up in the system, and they just became part of it and started protecting their reputation, protecting each other, and they lost sight of what God originally put into their heart. So I would call them back to their first love and say, what was the first dream, the first vision that God birthed in you to help people? And there's no way you can't, the Bible says it all over the place, you can't serve God and man. You can't. So as long as you're trying to serve your boss or do what's going to please the people around you, you're going to sin against God. And so we have to decide that we only have one boss. There's only one person that we live to please, and let the chips fall where they may. But there's not very many people that are willing to pay that kind of price and live that way. So I wish that they all would do that, and we would see such a change in this nation and in our state. Things would never be the same again.
I'd like to talk to them about doing their job with excellence. Like judges, they're afraid to judge. They're afraid to adjudicate in their power. They have the ability to dismiss cases, but what they say is, we're just going to push this off to a jury because it keeps them from being accountable for their decisions. And even though they know what's right to do, they're afraid to do it. And if you have detectives that do not have to have any extra certification or training or anything that enables them to do their job better, then there's a problem. I mean, the detective Elliott said on the oath he had 2 years of college. He didn't even get a degree. He had no specialized training other than CLEAT, and they all go through that training, and he's a detective. And when he started doing our case, he had been a detective for only a year and a half, and he's the lead detective. There is no experience and there is no training. So he has allowed, in my opinion, he has allowed his background of his life to influence what he does now in his job. And because he has a pretty rough background, he sees everything through those lenses. So he saw, like he said in his own mouth, and it's verifiable by people that are willing to go under the oath and say it, that he was coming to a murder scene because the child died. And he doesn't believe SIDS exist. If you want to think that out as a parent or a grandparent or anybody with a child, that should scare the life out of you, because if that child dies in your possession and there's no obvious root like a gunshot, a knife wound, a broken neck, some reason that child died, an overdose or something, you're going to be charged with murder. Because if SIDS doesn't exist, what other explanation is there? There isn't. SIDS is just a category to put an unexplainable death that you can't find out why that child died.
It's not a diagnosis. It's a category.
And that is a horrendous thing that the entire sheriff's department bought into and believes, because he went to a 1-hour seminar and OSBI told him SIDS doesn't exist, even though there's plenty of evidence showing that it does.
I don't think it was OSBI. I'm sorry.
Anyway, the system has to become transparent, and there has to be accountability for what they do. And they do need some protection, so they can't be just victimized also. But if they choose to go forward and they are so blatantly willing to ignore evidence that doesn't suit their cause, then they should be held accountable to that, even up to their job in prison, because they have done irreparable damage to people. We're not the only victims. In Wagner County, there is thousands of victims because of their lack of integrity and lack of doing what's right. One of the biggest things that has been said from everybody, from almost every attorney, DAs, judges, is that they can't go against the other people because they have to work with them. They have to have a working relationship. But they're doing it at the expense of families. So it's okay to destroy a family to preserve a working relationship that they don't even work for. That's ridiculous. There has to be a way for people who have been falsely charged to be able to have their say and have things corrected. I don't have ill feelings for him, but when the detective says, I'm just following the evidence, but when you present evidence when he refuses to take and consider that is actually going to either prove his case or disprove his case, he's telling you he's not interested in the truth. He's interested in winning.
And when he interviewed our oldest daughter, at the end of the interview, they handed her a business card and said, well, if you think of anything or anything comes back to your memory that could help us, let us know, but don't call us if it's just ulterior possibilities of what could have happened. I was just dumbfounded. I was like, did you really just say that? So it's mind-boggling. It's just mind-boggling.
The average person has no idea this stuff is going on.
Nope.
And we have to wake up and understand that we have to be involved in our communities and know who is in these important positions as sheriff and detective and DAs and judges. We don't know. We don't know anything about these people, but yet we keep electing them.
Right.
If we don't start waking up and putting godly men and women with integrity to do the right thing, everybody's focus should be to find the truth and let that determine what happens. If that's not their goal, then it's a corrupt system. Yep. And even the ME is unbending to amend her report because she's so proud of not changing it that and that's going to affect us for life, because murder never goes away. There's no statute of limitation on murder. Right. So anytime in our lives and our children's lives, they could come back and recharge for murder and put us through this all over again if they don't amend that ME report.
Right. And we've had death threats. We've been maligned in ways. I mean, it was terrifying just the thought of leaving the house. But one of the biggest things that's been causes anxiety, and I've had quite a few hyperventilating situations. It's gotten a little better this year, but I would go out to the grocery store or Brahms or whatever and be terrified that I'd run into my grandson, because it was a damned if you do and a damned if you don't situation. Because if I see him and I talk to him, I go back to jail. But if I don't talk to him and he sees me walk away from him again, I destroy him. So guess what? If I see him, I'm going back to jail, because I'm not going to hurt him. I'm not going to ignore him if he sees me. And so it's this whole mask mandate thing. If there's one thing that it's done for me, is I've been glad in the one respect is that I can go to the store and he won't recognize me. You know what I mean? But that's terrible. But my daughter actually ran into him just over a year ago at Walmart. She came around the end cap. There on the other end of the aisle, there he was, standing there by himself, hands in the air, like he was looking for somebody. She gasped. Her friend pulled her back. She hid behind the end cap and filmed him. I have it. And she didn't run. She wanted, everything in her wanted to run up to him and scoop him up. But she knew if she did, she'd break his heart all over again. And so she held herself back from doing that to save his heart, so that he wouldn't be further damaged and further hurt. It's just a horrible way to live. We live in the same town. It's a matter of time before we're probably going to run into him, and then we're going to be in trouble for it, And they have the DHS has been working with the prosecution, and they have led the counselors and the foster mom believe that the first charges are still intact. As it turns out, they haven't told them that the charges were dropped, that there was 2 forensic interviews. They haven't told them about the professional evaluations that have been done, about what the experts have said, that this didn't happen. So they're understandably scared to death, because they think that what was initially charged is still true, and nobody's been keeping them up with it. So it's just crazy. It's crazy. Get involved. We've got to start taking responsibility. I know this sounds so bizarre. People think this is an isolated situation, but we've come to realize it's not nearly as isolated as you think it is, and there's a lot more innocent people in our jail and our prison systems than we ever thought that there were, because it's a very flawed system, because it's all made up of men and women. And as long as it's made up of human beings, it's going to be fraught with flaws, because people have conflicts. They want to do the right thing, but part of them wants to build themselves up, and there's going to be corruption. So it's a very flawed system. There's a lot of people getting hurt and destroyed. But for us, we've had to hire 12 attorneys, because we had to lawyer up our children, because when they couldn't get something more from us, they started going after our children, and we had to get lawyers for them. Then when they changed the charges, you've got to pay for an attorney again, or you have to get a specialized attorney according to the way that the case is going. We've had to pay for experts. So this house that was paid off before all this started, that we worked 30 years to pay off, we now have been working for the last 3 years slowly to renovate it so that we can sell it to help pay off 12 lawyers. And we've got, if it wasn't for our friends and relatives that have stood by us, who knew from the get-go that this didn't happen, who have given up their livelihoods and given up their retirements to be able to, so that we're not in jail right now. I mean, we're talking probably $1.5 million altogether that everybody's put in to make things what they are now. It's amazing. So we had somebody donate a RV to us. It's 10 years old, but it's in great condition, and at least we know that even if we have to sell this home, we'll have a roof over our heads, and hopefully have a place to call home. I mean, I love this house, I love this home, but until this county changes or has some accountability or a turnover or something, I'm not sure I could ever feel safe living here. I don't think anybody living in this county is safe as long as these kind of things are going unchecked. And that's scary, especially if you have little children, you're just a sitting duck until if something bad happens, look out, you know. It's terrifying. It's terrifying. So we just, we've given up. We've been selling things off, selling off different items and stuff like that. And we've sold one of our cars and just whatever we've had to, you know, to try to keep things going. And that's where it's at for us. If you know of anything, if you know of anybody who can help, please save our family. Just if there's anything that you can do to help, please let us know. It's not over yet. Somehow they've kept it going and going. They just keep changing the charges. So we want our life back. We want our family back. More than anything, that's what we want. So.
I'd say, just so you know, get involved in your community. Don't let the county run itself. Show up to the county meetings, city council meetings. Know what's going on. Know who your DA is and the ADAs. Know who your judges are, and hold them accountable to do the right thing and not just pass the buck off to a jury. You know, do what you've been hired to do, and don't let. There's half of the voting precincts in this state are vacant of having somebody represent that neighborhood or that precinct. Get involved with the precinct level so you can help educate people on getting to know who's in office. We have allowed the system to be what it is because we have failed to get involved and hold them accountable. There has to become transparency and accountability. And if you have connections to people of authority, talk to them about how it can be changed, because we have to make every community safe, but at the same time, it can't be corrupt and cause people's freedom to be taken from them because you have a bias and you're in a position of authority. That's very dangerous, yeah. And that's what Wagner County is full of people who shouldn't be in those positions of authority.
Right.
And if that doesn't change, they just keep getting voted in without anybody opposing them. The district attorney or the district judge Kirkley just got put into office as district judge over the Wagner County because nobody ran against him. The sheriff had one person run against him, but it was somebody unfunded. It didn't really mount a campaign, so he was basically unopposed. There is so many things that are done without anybody concerned with it, but it affects your life. When you get an opportunity strikes and they see it, they're going to take it, and you're going to pay the consequences. So
I did want to say too, because I mean this sounds so evil, and it really is. But to meet these people with their game face on, you know, I mean, these are, for instance, Judge Luton, very friendly, likable guy, helpful, just not much of a backbone. You know, the DA comes across very nice. So does the ADAs and all the other players involved, you know, because that's what they're presenting to the public. And I'm not trying to say that they're the devil with horns or something like that, but I'm trying to say that, you know, at first glance you go, oh, I know that guy. He's a nice guy. He would never do that. Well, you know what's presented on social media. That's what you know. You don't know the inner workings behind the scenes. Nobody is above being tempted to do things for selfish ambition and for the wrong reasons, or fear of man, or what will other people say. Nobody's above that, and they're just as human as the rest of us. But the lack of humility, the lack of ownership when they make a mistake, and being willing to say, hey, maybe we made a mistake, you just don't see that. And that's what's needed to bring healing. There has to be some humility, enough to say that maybe we were wrong,
and let us do what we can to help you recover. Mistakes are going to happen, but they do not have to go on this long and be perpetuated, way far and years and years and years. It doesn't have to. They could see in the beginning the writing on the wall that this wasn't real, but by then they felt like, I think they just felt like we're in too deep. They should have stopped when they had many, many, many opportunities to stop and to make things right. But it's pride, I think, that keeps it going. It's pride. So,
Thank you.
thank you so much.
Now, to a Fox 23 exclusive. A state representative from Stillwater says he believes this OSU student we told you about, Glory Woolley, who filed a civil rights lawsuit last week against the Wagner County Sheriff, one of his detectives, and two others, alleging they were part of a conspiracy following the death of this baby boy she's holding, a conspiracy to fabricate and withhold evidence. This involves Glory Woolley's 14-month-old nephew, Elijah, who died in his crib in Broken Arrow 3 years ago this month. Glory's parents, Bill and Lisa Woolley, Elijah's legal guardians, were charged with murdering the child. But eventually, that case didn't hold up, and just last summer, those charges were dropped. Even so, Glory's other nephew, a then 5-year-old who authorities took from the home after the death of his little brother, has never been allowed to return and remains with a foster family. We can't name him or show you his picture because of DHS privacy rules. But I can show you this letter from Representative John Talley, written March 11th, 1 year ago, to DHS Director Justin Brown. It says, as Vice Chairman of the Children, Youth, and Family Services Committee, I feel this case has been grossly mishandled. Justice is not being served in this case, and the child's well-being is suffering because of it. Michigan's DHHS has already agreed to take on the case if Oklahoma DHS is willing to relinquish it. There are 2 certified foster families eager and willing to welcome the child into their homes. Both foster families are relatives of the child. The letter was co-signed by 2 other state representatives, and yet all this time later, Representative Talley told me he has never gotten a response from Director Brown or from anyone with Oklahoma DHS.
This very private, secret proceeding.
As for Glory, I talked with her on campus in Stillwater. She said those boys were her whole world, and that she's constantly haunted, thinking about her nephew's fear and confusion, abruptly taken from his home and cut off from his family.
Every day. Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine what he's going through. I mean, our family went through something tragic, doesn't begin to describe it. And what my parents went through with actually being in jail for 2 different stints, I can't imagine what they went through. And he went through the worst. It always seems like my parents probably had it the worst, and by far, he has it the worst. He was taken from his family for years, with no support around him, with nothing, and I can't even begin to imagine how hard that is for him.
And he hasn't been able to see
No,
his family?
he has not.
Not even supervised visits?
Nope, nothing.
So you just disappeared?
Yep, he was just taken from our house one day, and that's it. And he, there's not really good enough words to describe that. And I can't imagine how hard that is for him. I know it's almost unimaginable how hard it is for us. I can't imagine how hard it is for him. And, the only thing that we can hope from all this is to one day have him back and try to make up for lost time. But it's been years, and I can't imagine what he thinks or what he's going through, and the trauma that he's endured it's unimaginable.
As I've reported, Wagner County Sheriff Chris Elliott sent a statement saying he couldn't comment on the lawsuit other than the sheriff's office is reviewing, quote, what we believe to be a lawsuit full of baseless allegations. Finally, I received an email this week from Representative Talley saying, I just wanted to reach out and say something about Glory. I've known her for 4 years. We have worked Fellowship of Christian Athletes youth camps together. I have literally trusted my life in her hands. And I know that when she tells me something, it's truthful. I would love to see this resolved to protect her honor.
They don't see another option. Everyone's against them.
Lori says what she wants is for the truth to come out in federal court, for a judge to declare that the Wagner County Sheriff's Office in this case has done great harm, and for her nephew to be reunited with his family. So I have also reached out to the DHS director since last March. No response. As for Bill and Lisa Woolley, they are scheduled for yet another hearing next month on lesser charges that the Wagner County District Attorney's Office has completely changed or amended some 24 times since the murder charges were dropped. The Woolleys say the DA's office is just trying to make something stick. But Bill Woolley's attorney, during a hearing in December, put it stronger, saying, quote, "I just want to go on the record and make sure at the appropriate time down the road that everyone recognizes what the state of Oklahoma is trying to do in this case in an effort to avoid a lack of evidence to support any allegations of criminal activity." Of course, I will continue to follow this closely.